Hello guys, welcome back to my channel. If you're new, my name is Monica and I love panning eyeshadow palettes. I have done a Pan That palette for every year since 2018. Project panning, specifically Pan That palette, is like my favorite project because I learn so much. It really gets me out of my comfort zone every year and I enjoy the entire process, which is why I keep doing it up until this day. Last year I did a video where I ranked all of my previous Pan That palettes, and since I did finish my 2022 Pan That palettes, I was getting requests to do an updated version of that video, so here we are. So I did not go back and rewatch last year's video because I kind of wanted to come at this ranking with like fresh 2023 eyes, so I'm gonna go through and rank all the palettes I have previously panned. I think we're gonna start with like my least favorite all the way up to my favorite, and I'll talk about a little bit of the palettes here and there, but if you are interested in the entire process, I have playlists where I show like month by month, update by update, looks, everything for each one of these palettes. I will have them all linked in the description box down below. I'm also working on my 2023 Pan That palette right now, which I am not going to include in this ranking because it's not done. So, spoiler alert, it's not really a spoiler alert because it's April, and well, it's April when I'm filming this. It might not be April when you're seeing this, but it's not done. But if you want to see that project and subscribe and follow along as the year goes by, we'll see whether or not I can either hit pan in every shade or finish it up. But you know, stick around for the fun. But I'll throw my last update up in the cards if you're interested in this year's Pan That palette. So let's go ahead and start. I'm going to start with my number 6 palette. And I don't have the original packaging for this one. The original packaging I do have for the rest of them, but this one I specifically got rid of, and that's the Blood Sugar palette. I'll throw a picture of it right here. I did this in 2020, and at the end of the project, I only had a little bit of shadow left, and I took that shadow and I combined it with a lot of other eyeshadow and face palettes to kind of make this custom face palette. Now, I have to say, I kind of regret I don't regret transforming what was left of that palette into a different product. I kind of regret using this much product because the shades that you see here, it's really only like, I want to say 25% Blood Sugar palette and then 75% other shades. I mixed in other blushes, other eyeshadows. I kind of went crazy and I created these shades. And as you can see, none of them have pan because there's a lot of product in here. I've been like regularly using this blush up here. I actually had to pull it out of my everyday makeup basket because I was using it. And none of these have pan. This one does have a little bit of hard pan right here, but despite using these fairly often, they don't show a lot of use. And I kind of regret creating these products that have so much product in them. I kind of wish I had cut it down and really only made a couple, using really only the product that was left in the Blood Sugar palette, because I'm kind of left with these, and while I do enjoy reaching for them, I feel like I'm never going to finish them. Unless I make it a specific project. So I'm not ruling that out. That might be a project in the future. But I have to say, overall, looking at like all these projects and looking back on them, because of that big regret, I'm kind of putting Blood Sugar towards the bottom. Not towards the bottom, on the bottom. So after Blood Sugar, I'm going to go ahead and put the Lila palette. Only because, as far as color stories go, I'm opening it, it's empty, you're not going to say anything. But as far as color stories go, these, like the red shades in the Blood Sugar and the purple shades here, they're not my favorite. I definitely lean more towards like green, brown, maybe some blue shadows when it comes to color. The reason I chose this and the reason I chose Blood Sugar was to get me out of my comfort zone because I was not reaching for not reaching for purples, reds, or pinks, like at all. That being said, this was a hard palette to pan. There's a lot of product in these Natasha Denona palettes. I'm really glad I did pan a Natasha palette because I don't think I ever really would have pushed myself outside of the green brown palette because I regret purchasing that one because it was so expensive and I really wanted to get my money's worth out of it. But outside of that palette, I was not going to use a Natasha palette to completion, most likely, unless I pushed myself to make it a part of this project. So I'm glad I finished it. I just don't enjoy the colors. I didn't enjoy the process as much as some of the other palettes that I have. All right, next I'm going to put the Colourpop Yes Please palette. So this one was actually one of last year's palettes. And this one has a very similar color story to Blood Sugar, or at least some of the shades. There were reds, there were very, very warm tones in here. And I picked this one, quite frankly, because it was so sentimental to me. This one I purchased, it was back when I really couldn't afford the Sunset palette yet. I do have the Sunset palette right now. Buying this palette was it was the very first Colourpop palette they ever released. And Colourpop has kind of exploded since and it's gone a little off the rails. So this really was kind of like old school, you know, almost like very beginning innocent Colourpop, and I was not reaching for this palette because of that, because I was putting it up on this pedestal like it was a piece of makeup history that I had. But I'm glad I used it up. So this is kind of like right in the middle. It was shades that I probably wasn't going to pan completely unless I did this project, but it's also not my favorite. So right there in the middle. All right, next we are at palette number 3 in the ranking. I'm putting the Marc Jacobs Style Icon palette in Lolita. This was the first palette I ever panned. And I gotta say, I love the packaging. I loved how the neutrals were. This was like the perfect palette to start my panning project journey with, because it was neutral, but they were textured, unique, fun neutrals. And I don't know, whenever I look back at this palette, I get sentimental, and I actually, honestly, I kind of miss it. And I almost went out and I almost purchased more Marc Jacobs palettes when I found out the brand was shutting down because they were on sale. But I don't know, I held back because not only do I have a large eyeshadow palette collection, I kind of wanted to keep the memory of this journey as it was, you know, and not taint it with like another palette that I would keep in my collection and maybe not reach for, who knows. But I enjoyed this. I enjoyed the color story. I enjoyed the journey. And for me, this now is at number 3. Coming up to number 2, I have the other palette that I panned last year. I have the Urban Decay Naked 2 palette. And again, this was a very sentimental palette for me. This is like one of the first ever higher end palettes I was ever able to actually purchase. And this came out, and this was the one palette I remember specifically. There were like those pictorials all over Pinterest, and it was how to get this look, and everyone was using the Naked 2 palette because it was like the next hot thing. It was after the Naked palette kind of blew up, and this was the first thing they released after the popularity of the Naked palette, so it had to be good to follow up the Naked palette, right? And it was. It was such a great palette, and part of me, like, was upset to see it go, but I really enjoyed the process of actually using it up. Except for the fact that these pans are so skinny. I hate these pans. I actually ended up like depotting most of these shades in order to use them up because I hate the tiny little skinny rectangular pans. They are like the bane of my existence. I much prefer a round or a square eyeshadow pan. But as far as the actual shades, the actual palette, I really enjoyed the process of using this. So that's why it's at number 2. Now, last but certainly not least, we have palette number 1, and if you've been with my channel for a bit, you probably already know what this one is because it's the only palette I have not talked about yet, but we have the ABH Subculture Palette. This was such a unique palette that made like the biggest shitstorm when it came out because of everything, but I loved the color story. This color story was just phenomenal. It was fall in a palette. It was bright, it was grungy, it was everything I ever wanted. I wanted the palette so bad, but I was also intimidated by it. So this was like out of all of these, this was probably the palette I had the most fun panning. Because every day it was just like, I was full of inspiration. I was excited to get in there and do the makeup look. And I was also scared because ABH shadows are super pigmented and a little goes a long way. So panning this the second year, I went from the Marc Jacobs to this. So I kind of like jumped in the deep end. So I kind of jumped in the deep end there by jumping straight to this, but I'm glad I did it. I had so much fun panning this, and this is the one playlist where I will just go back for funsies and watch this playlist back again. Because I love the looks that I created, I love the shades, I love the whole process. So out of all my pan the palettes, I think ABH Subculture takes the number 1 spot, at least for now. So that is it. Those are all of my previously panned palettes ranked from my favorite to my least favorite. I will most likely do this video again next year with a certain other palette, depending on how the project goes this year. So make sure you're subscribed if you're not already. Hit that bell icon to be notified whenever new videos do come out. And I cannot wait to see you in my next video. Bye.